You're listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Tannermunson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.
Hey there, welcome to Pluto Through the Houses. It's Louisa Tannermunson from Feel Good Astrology, and this is the third episode where I'm looking at how having Pluto in your third house of your birth chart brings up stuff in your life, how it affects you. And also at the end, looking at how Pluto transiting through your third house might reveal itself and what it means to you. Now, if you've listened to me before, welcome back and thanks for coming back. If you're a new listener, welcome to the channel. I hope it's really useful for you to explore how you can use Pluto and your Pluto position to the best advantage in your life. I mean, in this short podcast, I'm going to share my thoughts on all the unique strengths of your Pluto position, and also the challenges and what to consider in terms of Pluto's connection to the other planets. So for instance, some people, everyone's got Pluto somewhere in their chart. And for some of us, the lucky ones, I would say, you've got really good core aspects between Pluto and one of your planets. So for instance, somebody with Pluto and a trine to the sun will find it quite useful, whereas people who've maybe got Pluto in a square to, say, Mars or Venus might sometimes struggle to express their Pluto. So I'll also be looking at that. Before we go deep into its meaning in the third house, let's just refresh ourselves as to what Pluto might mean for us actually as a planet. I mean, essentially, Pluto is a transformer. It transforms our experience. In mythology, it's the god of wealth and power and the underworld and everything that's in darkness, so everything to do with power, everything to do with money, everything to do with what we are not seeing, what's secretive. It's like almost like the full extent of Pluto is what man will do to get the ultimate power and to get that ultimate wealth. And you may well find that the biggest explanation of the Pluto transformation is to realize that there's nothing that will stop you from the ultimate power and wealth and control. So it's pretty strong, and it shows us what we're wanting to control and have absolute dominion over. And it also shows us what we fear will happen if we don't have that dominion, and the conflict that we sit in when we're trying to understand that. And if you'd like to know more about Pluto and handling Pluto in general, I go into quite a lot of detail about this in my Pluto and Aquarius podcast. I go into a lot of the mythology of Pluto, and also how it might feel in the middle of a Pluto conflict. Anyway, essentially it shows us where we seek power, and it shows us where we feel weak and vulnerable if we don't have that power. In many respects, it pinpoints how our ego is trying to safety-proof our life so that we don't fall victim to what we think or fear is going to happen if we don't have that control. It also shows us where we experience trauma, manipulation, maybe sexual prowess imbalances and enemies. It shows us how they show up. And from a spiritual point of view, I think really Pluto shows us, where we have space to yield, space to have some humility against or alongside an outside unseen power. Because Pluto often shows up as something that we cannot stop. It's like an unstoppable force, and that we're just a tiny little human. And for a lot of people, when they first hear the call of Pluto, they stand strong and they put up a fight against, all the things we fear is going to happen because of Pluto. When, there's also the way of yielding, and personal experience has proven to me over and over, and also the experience of clients, when they've been talking to me, that when we're in a fight against what Pluto represents, we always come off worse, because we generate a false awareness of our power and our need for greatness and for the dominion. And so, after a while of coming face to face with this kind of strong wall or pushback, it shows us that actually we need to yield. We need to show some humility, that maybe we aren't the most powerful forces. And actually it is the the power of yielding, the power of letting go, and the power of saying, okay, that's not for me right now. It feels too difficult. It's actually that. And it's deeply painful to learn to let go, but it's that really teaches us how to be truly free. So, Pluto is definitely a double-edged sword. It will bring you your greatest traumas and also your greatest gifts. Now, in the third house, Pluto is bringing up a lot of different themes to do with power. But in particular to do with power within our community, our early life, our school, and our family context. So it's kind of about how we use our brain and our mind. Like the third house is associated with communications, and that's, I guess, where the early life and school comes in, because, in our early life, we are learning to read and write, we're learning to communicate, we're learning to make friends. And the third house, which is also associated with the sign of Gemini, is very much about popularity. So with Pluto in the third house, you're seeking power to be in charge or popular at school. You might be funny, you might be dominant because of your funniness, you might be the ringleader, you might be the power behind a gang. It's a kind of gang life. And gang sounds so horrific. And yet, I'm not really talking about gangs necessarily, but it could be a group. You could be part of a society. You could be part of a friendship circle. But it shows where we want to be in charge or popular and dominant. It just shows where we want to be significant, I guess. You're finding your value through through a sense of belonging to it. And so it can bring up a lot of clever personality and communication. So a lot of people with Pluto in the third, they will use the power of the mind and facts and figures. They'll know how to quote anything to be able to get their own way. They'll know how to be very rational about life, and they'll have access to scientific facts and things like that. The third house, yes, it shows intelligence and communications, but it doesn't show contextual learning. It shows facts and figures and statistics. It's not about the context, because anyone can look up, a source of information. And Pluto and third people will be able to find it quite quickly, and usually be able to repeat it verbatim. But it's almost like there's too much power put in the thought of being the smartest, being the most popular, being the best within the early community, the early life, the early family, the school context, between your siblings and cousins and the neighborhood kids and stuff. Now, Pluto also shows us what we fear. And so at some point you might fear not being able to talk. You might fear going deaf. You might fear not being bright. You might fear coming second in a class test. You might fear, and I guess if you become very popular and you're the cool kid, you might fear that one day you'll be knocked off your perch. And that you'll soon become unpopular. You might fear that someone is better than you. And so it can bring a lot of competition into the early school life and early family life. I mean, what you're really needing to learn with a Pluto in the third house is that we have different intellectual strengths and capabilities. So, for instance, I would see that people with trines and sextiles. So if your Pluto is really well attached to other planets through trines and sextiles, you've probably got a lot of mental stress. Mental strength and ability, so that you can be powerfully aligned to powerful learning. You can be a compelling leader. You'll be probably popular and be able to string a sentence and a thought and kind of envision and embolden people to follow you. It could be really persuasive, in fact. Now, if your Pluto is connected through squares and oppositions to some of your planets, saying a square to the sun or a square to the moon, you might feel a bit weak and unpopular. It might feel like you've got to work so much harder to become popular, and that it becomes a huge self-fulfilling prophecy that you're going to fail at it, and it's not actually because you are a failure. It's just because you're feeling frustrated that you'll never get there. That's the kind of thing that happens with Pluto, is the harder you work, the more you're scrabbling around in the dark trying to succeed, the more you're not seeing actually the easy way out, and the easy way out is to stop worrying. So you may well feel a bit weak and unpopular. Your self-worth could do with being built up. And if you've got squares and oppositions to other planets, it's really important to continue learning in your own way, and also to recognize that some of the wealthiest people are not the most educated people. Education doesn't equal or prove power or intelligence, even though our media and schools and institutions will tell you that. Some of the most maverick and intelligent people who I know to be wealthy, can't write, or, they have other people to do that, because they've learned how to think differently and they've learned how to use their mind in a different way. And if this is something that you're a bit worried about, in terms of how you can manage your Pluto in the third house, it's quite helpful to unpack within a small online study group. And if that's something that might be interesting to you, then just give me a shout, send me an email. It's louisatannermunson@gmail.com. And we can set up a small group and explore Pluto together. But, what is causing you pain here is the feeling that you're rejected, and you're rejected because you're not intelligent enough, you're not smart enough, you're not popular enough. It's like saying that you're a bit thick, that you're not part of the group. It's an alienation from siblings and cousins and local children. It's an alienation from your community. And how you might find freedom is almost to let go of the rankings of popularity and not worry, and to not worry about being so deeply connected with people. Not to judge others on their popularism, and just kind of let any kind of shallow thinking or power go. Now, I imagine that people with Pluto in the third will have really felt, they would have been people that really felt the effects of the pandemic phenomenon, because, one of the things that was deeply affected through power, the use of power, and Pluto does show up as an abundance of overreach, like power overreach. How the pandemic was managed was this idea that without the tightest of controls that affect how the community comes together and stays together and works together, it's like there has to be this way. It's this way or nothing. And so communities were kind of devastated. And if you've got your value traditionally from being part of the community, from being busy within the community, from being a thought leader in the community, that would have raised a lot of issues for you. Because, one of the things about a thought leader with Pluto in the third is that you stay abreast of current facts. Well, unless I'm mistaken, the last few years have had sort of counterintelligence going in all sorts of different directions. None of us could really put our hands on our heart and say we could be sure of anything other than what was directly in front of us, because lots of different statistics were coming out from different places. Lots of people were censored. And so really, where was the actual truth? I wonder if we'll ever know. I am very skeptical of people who say, well, this is obviously the truth because we've been told this from the CDC. Well, we've since learned that some of these organisations that we've relied upon to tell us the truth have actually used their power and influence to not tell the truth and to silence anyone that talks against it. So we've been living in precarious times. And if you've got Pluto in your third, or Pluto going through the third, this kind of thing will have really upset the apple cart for you because knowing what you know and having confidence in that is paramount. And all of a sudden your source materials disappeared, but also being able to stay in communication and connected to people has changed. So it will have been a big event for you. And something with a lot of unpacking. Now, in terms of Pluto transiting through your third house, some of these themes are coming up again, but your need to be powerful and supported at this time is huge. So if anything, you are feeling unpopular and like you can't give yourself away. It's like, crikey, I'm like a leper here. Nobody wants anything to do with me. how do I improve that? So you may well find that Pluto brings in bullies into your midst in a way that you haven't experienced since school, really. It will bring up this feeling of it doesn't matter how hard you try, you just might find that your old popularity beliefs or failures keep your thriving away. So if you believe that you're not popular, and if you've got a whole list of times when you're bullied in the past, the chances are Pluto in the third, as it's moving through your third house, is going to replicate that or bring that trauma back for you to experience. It also feels like you've got no value or self-worth within the community that you're operating in. And it's very difficult to get the permission or approval of the community. And so one of the things you'll be working on is, how do I get that approval back? Or how do I even earn it in the first place? So for instance, you may well find that when Pluto is in the third, you're gaining power through the authority or acceptance of a group. So you might have an online, given that we're working predominantly in online forums now, you may well find that if you've got Pluto transiting through your third, or it's in the third, that you're somebody who has a large community around them, or that you're developing a community around you. If your Pluto is pretty poorly represented in your chart, you'll probably struggle with that and struggle with the feelings of insecurity that it brings up for you. Whereas those who've got a very strongly placed Pluto and who have lots of easy connections will probably really thrive when that's happening, especially if transiting Pluto is also making a lovely connection with one of your big planets. So it's definitely worth looking at if you are having Pluto going through your third, because it could be a time when you absolutely feel like there's no support. And because there's no support, it's like, where's the belonging? Where do I belong? Because I will say, like, the third house, one of its key themes, which isn't always mentioned by astrologers, because they focus on community, early life, school, family context. But what links all of that together is the sense of belonging. So, at some level, it's like, where do I belong? And how do I get that feeling of belonging? So your biggest learning here, if Pluto is going through your third house, is that popularity and community thinking is not what it's cracked up to be, and that success may feel empty and meaningless because if you get what you fear not having, like if you get that success and that popularity, you might still feel empty, because really you're looking at the energy of belonging. How can you feel like you belong and add value without feeling diluted by the power of the community? So much to go through. And again, like, if you would find this useful to unpack in a small online group or even in a reading, then just reach out. It's louisatannermunson@gmail.com. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this episode, and maybe see you in another one soon. Take care. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Tanner Munson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.